Okay, once again, my name is Stephen Hewer. I am owner of Synergistic Nutrition. I am a naturopath. I got a Bachelor of Science degree in nutrition in 1990. I've been in private practice ever since. I'm always seeking out the best products on the market simply because they make all the difference. And today, I'm grateful to be able to talk to Archie Welsh, who lives in Michigan and wrote a booklet on cod liver oil, so has some degree of expertise on it. And so I'd like to ask, give you all the benefit of listening to this, his answers to my questions. So, Archie, what was the title of the booklet you wrote?
It was just called The History of Cod Liver Oil.
Okay. So tell us what the history of cod liver oil is, if you could.
It's really, it's really kind of short and blunt. Cod liver oil's had several lives. Originally, the Vikings would consume the whole cod. A lot of times they would make a dish with cod liver roe, cod liver oil, and the cod liver oil fillets, and just mix all that up and eat it. This would
raw, right?
Yeah, a lot of it raw, correct. And this would build up a lot of their vitamin D levels to get them through the long winters, because in northern Norway, the winters are the nights are, but the land of the midnight sun. So you're talking about 20 to 21 hours of darkness and only 3 hours of light. So having some vitamin D other than the sun was critical for them.
Right.
Then there was back in maybe the 1600s, 1700s, the Vikings, they started a whole trade route along the coast of Europe, trading dried cod for other goods. And that kept going. And so fishing became a huge part of Norway's economy. And what they did is they would take the old fishermen would take the cod liver oil and they would just rub it on their joints because they were sore, and for whatever reason it just relieved the soreness.
Right.
And so all the apothecaries and the practitioners at the time, the infirmaries, they would pick up on this, and so they would prescribe cod liver oil as a topical to their patients. Well, for whatever reason, in 1776, in this infirmary in Manchester, and all this has been recorded, one of the practitioners had a patient with rheumatism, which is basically joint issues, told her to take the cod liver oil, rub it on her joints, and by the way, just ingest some too. Why he said that, nobody really knows. So she did, came back in a couple weeks, and completely cured.
Wow.
And so this sparked the whole craze for cod liver oil. It was healing infections, tuberculosis infections, gout. It was preventing rickets, which was a huge problem back in the Industrial Revolution. So from that point on, cod liver oil became officially a medicinal, a medical product in about 1825. The downside, and the other part of cod liver oil, is the vast majority of cod liver oil used during the Industrial Revolution was used as a commercial product, mostly as lantern fuel.
Oh.
So people are familiar with whale oil being used as a lantern fuel. Cod liver oil was another huge marine oil that was used as lantern fuel. So it was distributed throughout Europe as a lantern fuel.
Wow.
And they used for tanning hides and lubricants and paint bases. So the oil, when they would extract it, they'd basically come back from fishing and just throw them in a barrel. And after the fishing season, which was all winter long, they would just take these barrels back to their village, and they would start to decay in the warmer sun of the spring and the summer. And so they would actually break down, and the oil would rise to the top. They would scoop that off and sell that as a fuel oil. As you can imagine, this oil was horribly rancid.
Yes.
And so what happened is they would actually say this is what they used as the medicinal to begin with. And
right.
Finally, in around 1850, a gentleman by the name of Mueller came up with the idea of, hey, why don't we get out of this industrial oil process and make an actual medicinal for people? So they started steam rendering fresh livers. So the fish would come back, they'd get the livers out, they'd steam them right away.
So go ahead and say what's the problem with these oils, these rancid oils.
Um, that anytime you have a highly polyunsaturated fatty acid, they oxidize very easily. And so these oils that were made in the Industrial Revolution, they oxidized easily. But you're talking about something that's sitting in a barrel for 3 to 6 months, just horribly rancid. Um, so the idea of let's steam render these. It cleaned up the oil, took a lot of the rancid factors out. And this is what they called a medicinal oil. It was still somewhat pale. Then they'd have the brown oils, and that's what they would use for industry. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough of the pale oil to go around because by now, all of Europe, all of the Americas were in desperate want of this cod liver oil.
Right.
They had no idea why it worked. They had no conception of vitamins A and D or omega fats or anything. All they knew is that this oil was doing some tremendous benefits for people with health issues. So after they cleaned up, the brown oil sort of went away, and from about the late 1800s to about the 1950s, this is the oil that they sold. This medicinal
steam distilled.
Oil. The biggest drawback to this, even though that they bottled this fresh, it would still go rancid.
Right.
Because there's no vitamin E, there's no antioxidants that are naturally in cod liver oil. And they had no concept of adding antioxidants at that time. So the oil would go rancid. So, if you speak to anybody, parents, grandparents that were forced to take it as a child,
yeah,
they just remembered this horrible tasting oil. Well, it was just horribly rancid.
Right.
So what happened in the 1960s, a lot of these large cod liver oil producers were by pharmaceutical conglomerates. And their whole philosophy is purify it. And so now they take all these steps starting in about the 1960s to purify the oil. Molecular distillation, deodorization, bleaching, alkali refining, winterization. Those are just a few of the steps. There's usually like 10 to 13 steps that go into an industrial processed oil. 99% of the oil today that you see on the store shelves is so highly processed that it has destroyed the natural vitamin A and the vitamin D that cod liver oil is known for.
And they have to add it back.
And they add it back synthetically.
Yeah.
So the advantage of taking cod liver oil just went out the window. You might as well just take some synthetic vitamin A and D and be done with it. You are going to get some omega fats, but you're going to get that in any fish oil. So what Rosita, a small family outfit in northern Norway, decided to do is, hey, we've got the technology now. We have a better understanding of antioxidants. We have oxygen-free bottling. We have refrigeration, which was not as widespread back in the day. And we have faster transportation. So why don't we just make it fresh? And so they add rosemary herb and vitamin E to each bottle, and that acts as the antioxidant. We keep the bottles refrigerated. Now, they do make a soft gel, which is not refrigerated because it's completely encased, so it's not going to be exposed to oxygen.
Right.
So that one is not refrigerated. The other with the bottles. And it took them about a year, maybe a little bit longer than a year, maybe a year and a half to perfect the antioxidant package. Because if you put too much in, it becomes a pro-oxidant, and you're just getting the opposite results that you want. Not enough, obviously, it's going to go rancid. So they had a little window, and they perfected that. The extraction uses no heat, no chemicals. They use an old Viking technique that's been handed down. It's basically sort of like the best way to describe it is to say it's sort of a reverse pressure, because these fjords in Norway are so deep and so cold. So they get the fish up, get the livers out, and just the difference in temperature, going to from the cold ocean to the room temperature, and the difference the deep ocean, the surface, they would score the livers, and they would just exude the oil on its own.
Wow.
And so they didn't have to use any pressure, any heat, and they'd get about 90-95% of the oil out of the liver that way.
Good.
Then they run it through a filtering system that uses materials from the ocean that attract contaminants, heavy metals, dioxins, and then they have to hold it there in a chilled tank until it's been tested. And so we have to make sure that it's always going to be below the strict standards of Norway and the European Union for contaminant levels. And then they actually post their results on their website, which is kind of unheard of in this industry. From there, they then run it through some paper filters just to make sure there's no sediment, and then they add the antioxidants, and they nitrogen flush the bottles and cap it with no oxygen. And when we get them here in the U.S., we keep them in refrigerated conditions and ship them out as quickly as possible. So it's about as close as you're going to get to actually going to Norway, catching your own fish and cutting the liver out and
it's the most alive cod liver oil I've ever found on the market. So what is the benefit to somebody taking this kind of a quality of a cod liver oil? What properties of this, how does it help their body?
Well, as we touched upon, you're not getting synthetic vitamins that you're going to see in the other brands. You're going to get the natural vitamin A and D with all the cofactors and everything it's in a great ratio. That's the beauty of cod liver oil, because there's other fish that have vitamin A and there's other fish that have vitamin D. But there seems to be this ratio of A to D that's in cod liver oil from the Atlantic cod, not from Alaska cod, not from pollock or other cod family fish, strictly the Atlantic cod. They found this great ratio.
Is it 10 to 1? 10 to 1 A to D?
It's either 10 to 1 or less is what you really want. And I think, I'm not 100% sure why, but it seems to me that from what I've been told, if you have too much A, it can actually suppress your D because they're both processed in the liver, that the overabundance of A can suppress your D.
Gotcha.
So that ratio is fairly important. So that's a key issue or reason to take cod liver oil in its natural form. Now, when they do add synthetics, they will do it into that 10 to 1 range. But again, you're getting an isolated form of the product, and there's
isn't it true
toxicity issues?
Isn't it true that there's isomers of A and D? In other words, it's not just vitamin A palmitate. It's like all these different molecules that are similar to and called isomers of vitamin A and vitamin D. Is that your understanding?
Correct. That is correct.
Yeah.
When you're getting a synthetic, you're not getting the full range of the vitamin.
Exactly.
You're just getting this isolated slice of it.
Yeah.
And so, to me, and to our clients, that's huge. That they're getting it in a natural form, and then you're getting a pretty good dose of DHA, EPA, along with this vitamin A and vitamin D, which is great, as you know, for brain health and a lot of other functions. So the benefits of cod liver oil, as long as they're fresh, it's a fresh oil in its natural form, are tremendous. You just don't find that anywhere.
Yeah.
So the key to us and to Rosita was keeping it fresh, because rancid oils are very damaging. And the odd thing about cod liver oil, it can be rancid, but it's still going to hang on to some of its vitamin A and D. So if you're lacking in those vitamins, if you're starving for them, you're going to see the benefits. But on the back end, it's kicking your butt. With all these rancid factors. So it's one of those foods that, everybody likes to say, well, every food you eat is either going to help you or harm you. Here's one that can do both. It can actually help and harm at the same time.
The thing I was thinking of is in the days where they were using the rancid cod liver oil as a result of fermenting it for 3 to 6 months and giving that to people and having these therapeutic effects, that was a time where the earth was not polluted, where we didn't have electromagnetic fields destroying people's, pH regulation in their body, and, exposure to pharmaceuticals in the past, exposure to mercury from fillings. There's so many factors that we are exposed to nowadays that deter or damage or interfere with our health that people didn't have back in the 1800s that they could have enough antioxidant capacity in their body to neutralize the oxidative properties, the free radical properties of the oxidized oils, and still benefit from the vitamin A and D.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. And on the other side of that, though, during the Industrial Revolution, you're talking about no control over pollutants whatsoever. The nutrients that you would think a lot of these people are getting, they weren't. For instance, vitamin D was lacking because rickets was a huge problem at that time.
Yeah.
And the cod liver oil really helped prevent a lot of those issues, which is why it was given to such young children at an early age on a daily basis. It just prevented rickets. So yes and no. When you're going into the Industrial Revolution, you're talking about even, child labor and just black smoke in the air and blotting out the sun.
Right, but that was the city, but people in the country were never getting rickets and they weren't sick at all. And then you also have, chemical agriculture had yet to come onto the stage, which it did in 1945. So people still had, if they lived in the country, they still had really good food.
I agree. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So as far as the sort of the accessibility of cod liver oil, we're under quotas like everybody else in Norway. So it's very sustainable. Norway is one of the few countries that has actually taken steps a long time ago to make sure that their cod population, because it is such a huge part of their economy, to make sure that the population wasn't destroyed. Now you go over to like Nova Scotia and along the Canadian border back in the 1980s, they almost completely wiped out the cod population. They tried to and bring up the populations, but once it's gone, once they've lost that tertiary position, they can't get it back.
Wow.
And so you won't see that cod populations like you will still see them along Norway and into Iceland.
Wow.
So it's and they've entered into some treaties with Russia because northern Norway share the same seas, and it's been good. And the cod populations there now are equal to and even surpassing what they had in World War II. So it's really come back strong.
That's good to
hear. Norway's done a really good job with that. And the other issue I think that's out there with fish oils in general is all these farm fish, and they're cultivating those to make fish oils, and it's just you're dealing with a product that doesn't have near the nutrients that a wild caught product would have.
Right.
And I think that's true of whether you're eating fish or the fish oil.
Yeah, I agree. Do you know anything about krill oil?
Other than most of it's highly processed. It does have astaxanthin. But I as far as what I'm concerned with is more of the vitamin A and D, and you're not going to get that in krill oil. So if you're looking for astaxanthin, maybe that's not a bad product. I guess it would just really depend on how did they process it.
Well, you can get the astaxanthin from algae directly and not have to get it from the krill. And I merely bring it up because, there's a major nutritional spokesperson out there who's always been saying that krill is superior to cod liver oil. And I say, no, that's not true. Cod liver oil has the EPA, DHA plus the vitamin A and the D. And now we have access to a product that's raw. So all the, another thing is when you heat fats, you can misshapen the molecules so they can't be used architecturally in the cells. So when you leave it raw, you're going to use it 100%, whereas this highly processed, heated krill oil, you can't make full use of it in terms of the essential fatty acids.
Well, that sounds accurate.
Yeah.
I just don't know much about krill oil. It's not something, because our whole focus was the vitamin A and the vitamin D. And, once we landed on Rosita, we just never looked around for another fish oil. And we do that with pretty much all the products that we get involved with. Once we find a fish oil that meets our criteria, we don't really look around for another one. There's no sense.
Right on.
And so, as far as krill oil or any of the fish oil, a lot of the fish oils come out from farm fish in. Actually, they use a lot of wild fish down in Peru. but it's a more of a byproduct. The oil is a byproduct of the fish meal industry.
Right.
So the oil is not necessarily handled all that well, and so they have to highly process that oil as well to make it even consumable. But you're still taking in an oil that's had a lot of rancid damage and continues to be damaged. So
Yep.
even after it's been bottled, it's still going rancid, and they'll flavor it, they'll deodorize it,
Right.
they'll do all sorts of things to it, but you're still getting a rancid product.
Exactly. All that emulsification and all that flavoring is merely to cover up and camouflage the rancidity. I've
Yeah.
tried quite a few cod liver oils over the years. I've been in this business a long time, and Rosita takes the cake. It's the best tasting, the best feels. I don't burp it up. And that's another thing people need to know. Burping up a fish oil is because it's an oxidized rancid oil. You don't burp fully digestible, non-oxidized oil.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Now we do have some, when I go to conferences and I'll taste out the cod liver oil, the EVCLO. I'd say about 85% of the people are like, "Hey, this tastes fine. It's a fresh fish. I mean, it tastes like fish." But there's some, like 10-50% of the population that they don't like fish,
Right.
so they're not going to like it.
Right.
But it's, when somebody calls us up and says, "Hey, this tastes horrible," well, it's not rancid. You just don't like fish. And some people don't process fats very well,
Right.
and they're going to have an issue with it. So those are about the only times we run into something, and that's why we really developed the soft gels for people that have these taste sensitivities. They can just take the soft gels, and because it's doesn't have to be refrigerated. It's convenient to take with them to work or traveling or wherever they're going.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Archie, for this excellent education on Rosita cod liver oil and the whole history of cod liver oil. I think people are going to really appreciate this because it's the only information on the market that really defines and distinguishes this product from all the other oils. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate it, and thank you. It was nice chatting with you.
Yeah.